summer of 1950, the government of East Germany issued an emergency directive. Citizens were instructed to search their fields, their gardens, their window boxes, and the vegetation along roadsides. What they were looking for was a small striped beetle, approximately 1 centimeter long, weighing less than half a gram. When found, it was to be collected in glass jars and handed over to local authorities. In some regions, collective farmers were assigned quotas, a minimum number of beetles they were required to deliver each season. Failure to meet the quota could result in an uncomfortable conversation with officials. Soviet radio broadcast warnings about the threat. School children received lessons on how to identify it. Newspapers published cartoons depicting a fat American capitalist dropping jars of beetles from an airplane onto the socialist agricultural lands. The beetle had been given an official nickname, the American saboteur. Here is what makes this story extraordinary. The beetle was not American. It was not a weapon. No airplane had dropped it. It had arrived entirely on its own, following the same natural trajectory it had been following for decades, spreading eastward across Europe at approximately 100 kilometers per year, carried by wind and trucks and railway cars loaded with potatoes, because a potato beetle will go where the potatoes go, and humans had been moving potatoes everywhere. And here is the other thing. The full mobilization of Soviet state power, the radio broadcasts, the leaflets, the school lessons, the quotas, the class hatred directed at a striped insect, did not stop it, did not even slow it significantly. The beetle crossed into Soviet territory in 1949. It reached Kaliningrad. Then it spread east. Then it crossed the Urals. It is now established across virtually the entire European part of Russia and is moving into western Siberia. It has developed resistance to more than 50 different classes of insecticides. 50. That is an absolute record among agricultural pests. No other species in the history of human agriculture has demonstrated the speed of chemical adaptation that this beetle has shown. We have thrown organochlorines at it, organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, the most sophisticated products of a century of synthetic chemistry. It has defeated every single one. And while we were doing all of this, while we were formulating new compounds, running trials, celebrating initial effectiveness, and then watching that effectiveness collapse within a decade, the beetle was doing nothing special. It was not adapting intentionally. It was not trying. It was simply eating potatoes and laying eggs and dying and reproducing the way it has done for millions of years, and the mathematics of that process was doing the rest. We declared war on a half-gram insect in the 1940s. The score, 80 years later, is not in our favor. This is not a story about a pest. This is a story about what happens when the most intelligent species on this planet, a species that split the atom, sequenced the genome, and landed on the moon, goes to war with evolution itself, and discovers that evolution does not negotiate, does not tire, does not run out of resources, and has been running its algorithms for 320 million years longer than we have been running ours. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what we are about to uncover about this beetle, the biology, the chemistry, the history, the extraordinary speed of its adaptation, will permanently change how you think about the relationship between human intelligence and natural selection. Let us start at the beginning. Not the Soviet propaganda beginning, and not the 19th century agricultural beginning. The real beginning. The Colorado potato beetle, Leptinotarsa disseminata, is not from Colorado. It never was. Its actual homeland is the high plateau region along the border of modern Mexico and the United States, the Sierra Madre Occidental. There, in the wild thickets of thorny nightshade plants that no farmer cultivated and no one particularly noticed. This beetle lived for what researchers estimate to be millions of years, quietly, unremarkably. One insect among thousands in a balanced ecosystem, kept in check by local predators that had co-evolved alongside it, feeding on wild plants that had co-evolved chemical defenses against it. It was not a problem. It was not even particularly interesting. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, American farmers moved west. They brought potatoes. Somewhere in the region of what is now Nebraska, approximately in the 1850s, potato fields first intersected with the territory of this quiet mountain beetle. The beetle tried the potato. The potato, being a nightshade, contained solanine, the same alkaloid the beetle had been processing from wild nightshades for millions of years. The beetle found the potato not just acceptable, but, by any measure the beetle has for evaluating food, vastly superior to its previous diet. Larger, more nutritious, present in enormous quantities, planted in convenient rows. The beetle had found paradise. What happened next is what agricultural historians call the first documented large-scale invasion of a cultivated crop by a pest at industrial scale. The beetle moved eastward at approximately 100 kilometers per year. By 1870, it had reached the Atlantic coast. From the Atlantic, it crossed to Europe on cargo ships. The first sustained outbreak in Europe was recorded in 1922 near Bordeaux, France. And this is where the name came from. Not from Colorado as a place of origin, but from Colorado as one of the first American states where the beetle was formally recorded and named by entomologists, because that is where it appeared in numbers large enough to require naming. European governments reacted with alarm. Germany introduced quarantine measures in 1930. Britain restricted potato imports from infected regions. But the beetle had no passport. It crossed borders the way evolution always crosses borders, through any available vector, in any available container, on any available vehicle, completely indifferent to the administrative boundaries that humans had drawn across its habitat. By the start of the Second World War, the beetle was established across Western Europe. The war finished the job. Quarantine systems collapsed. Agricultural controls were overwhelmed. The movement of troops and supplies across the continent created a distribution network that the beetle exploited with maximum efficiency. By 1945, it was standing at the borders of the Soviet zone of influence. And that is where the leaflets began. The Soviet propaganda campaign was, if you approach it purely as a communication strategy, remarkably well crafted. The beetle really had come from the West. It really had arrived precisely when Cold War tensions were escalating. It really was appearing first in areas near American military installations, which made geographic sense because those areas were close to the Western European populations the beetle had already colonized. If you did not know the natural history, it was entirely plausible. But entomologists had been tracking the beetle's spread across Europe for 20 years. They had documented the trajectory, the speed, the vectors. They knew exactly how the beetle moved and why. No aircraft were required. The beetle had wind, and it had the railway network, and it had the potato trade, and that was entirely sufficient. The propaganda campaign ran from the late 1940s to the mid-1950s. Its scale was serious. In schools, lessons were held on identifying the beetle. Radio broadcasts regularly reminded citizens to be vigilant. Collective farmers were required to collect and deliver specified quantities. In some regions, failure to meet quota had consequences. And here is the thing that I find genuinely interesting about this episode, and that almost nobody talks about. The campaign worked, but not in the way anyone intended. Mass manual collection is, from an ecological standpoint, the safest and most sustainable form of beetle control that exists. No chemical residues, no damage to pollinators or soil fauna, no resistance development, no ecosystem side effects. Just people in fields, picking beetles off leaves, at a scale that actually reduces population density. Soviet collective farms, when they followed the rules, also practiced systematic crop rotation, alternating potatoes with grains and legumes that the beetle cannot eat. A year without potatoes in a field is a year during which a significant fraction of the overwintering beetle population in that field simply starves before finding food. The ecology was correct, even if the politics were absurd. And this is perhaps the most Soviet thing about the entire episode, that a propagandistic lie accidentally produced environmentally sound behavior at scale for a period of years. The beetle turned from American saboteur into ordinary pest in the mid-1950s, once it became undeniable that it had arrived under its own power. The leaflets disappeared. The radio broadcasts stopped. The agronomic methods developed under the propaganda program remained in use, not because the ideology was correct, but because the methods actually worked. Now let us talk about the biology. Because the propaganda and the history are fascinating, but the biology is what makes this beetle genuinely extraordinary. The Colorado potato beetle feeds on nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. This is not a random dietary choice. It is the result of millions of years of specialized coevolution. Nightshades produce solanine, a toxic alkaloid specifically designed to prevent insects from eating them. For most insects, solanine is poison. For the Colorado potato beetle, solanine is dinner. But it is more than dinner. The beetle does not simply tolerate solanine. It accumulates it. Solanine from consumed leaves passes into the beetle's tissues, into its eggs, into its larvae. The beetle becomes toxic. Most birds that encounter it once do not encounter it again. The solanine produces digestive distress that is unpleasant enough to function as a reliable deterrent. In its native Mexico, local predators had millions of years to develop solanine tolerance. In Europe and Russia, they had none. The beetle arrived with a chemical defense that the local predator community had no answer to. This is why you should not crush a Colorado potato beetle on your garden bed, and why this is not folk superstition but actual chemistry. When you crush a beetle, its contents, including solanine and viable eggs, remain in place. Colorado potato beetle eggs have a dense, chitinous shell. Some of the eggs at the edges of a crushed clutch, protected by others above them, will survive mechanical destruction. The remains of the crushed beetle also release a chemical signal, a defensive secretion that functions as an alarm substance, with field observations suggesting that mass crushing on open ground can trigger increased activity and aggregation in nearby beetles. The correct method is collection in salt water or kerosene, or burning. Fire is the only reliable way to destroy both eggs and adults completely. The life cycle is designed around making the beetle as difficult to kill as possible at every stage. The adult beetle overwinters in the soil, descending to depths of up to half a meter, entering a state of reduced metabolism, diapause, that allows it to survive not just one winter without food, but potentially 2 or 3. If you leave a field fallow for a summer hoping to starve out the overwintering population, a significant fraction of that population will simply wait. They will emerge the following spring, or the spring after that, and begin the cycle again. When soil temperature rises above 10 degrees in spring, the beetle emerges, feeds, and begins reproduction. A single female lays between 400 and 700 eggs in one season, placed exclusively on the undersides of leaves, a placement that is itself a survival strategy, protecting the clutch from direct sunlight, rain, and contact insecticides that settle on upper leaf surfaces. The eggs hatch in roughly 2 weeks. The larvae go through 4 developmental stages, with the 4th stage, the fat, orange-red larva, approximately 1 centimeter long, causing by far the most damage per individual. The entire cycle from egg to reproducing adult takes approximately 3 weeks in warm weather. In the middle latitudes of Russia, 2 full generations per season is typical. In warmer southern regions, 3 is possible. Do the mathematics. 1 overwintering female in spring, 400 eggs, 200 daughters. Each daughter lays 400 eggs. Without mortality, without predators, without chemicals, by the end of a single summer, the theoretical descendants of 1 overwintered female number in the tens of thousands. In practice, mortality reduces this dramatically. But even at 1/10 of the theoretical maximum, the numbers are terrifying. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet, because the next part of this story, what happens when you try to fight these numbers with chemistry, is one of the most remarkable and humbling episodes in the history of human technology versus biology. When DDT appeared in 1940, it seemed like the answer. DDT was the first mass synthetic insecticide, a compound that killed insects reliably, cheaply, and at scale. Sprayed on a field, it killed the beetles. Not most of them, all of them. It was decisive, rapid, and apparently final. Agricultural scientists in the 1940s genuinely believed that the Colorado potato beetle problem was, essentially, solved. It took less than 10 years to find out otherwise. By the late 1940s, populations of Colorado potato beetle had appeared in treated areas, showing dramatically reduced sensitivity to DDT. The mechanism was exactly what evolutionary theory would predict, and exactly what the scientists of the time were not yet fully prepared to acknowledge. When you spray a field with an insecticide, you kill most of the beetles, perhaps 98%. The 2% that survive are not stronger or faster or smarter. They are simply the individuals who happened, by the random variation that exists in any large population, to carry genetic variants that allow them to neutralize or tolerate the compound. They survive. They reproduce. Their offspring inherit the resistance. Over several generations, and the Colorado potato beetle has 2 to 3 generations per year, which means selection pressure is applied 2 to 3 times annually. The resistant variants go from rare to common to dominant. The drug stops working. New insecticide. Different mechanism of action. Same result in approximately the same time frame. And again, and again. The Colorado potato beetle has now developed resistance to insecticides from more than 50 different chemical classes: organochlorines, organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, spinosins, each class representing a different approach to the same problem, each one eventually defeated by the same mechanism. The combination of large population size, rapid generation time, and the genetic diversity that ensures that somewhere in a population of millions, there is almost always at least one individual that can handle whatever you throw at it. What makes this speed of adaptation possible is a specific convergence of biological features. A short life cycle means that natural selection gets to test the population against the new threat 2 or 3 times per year instead of once per generation. A high reproductive rate means that even rare resistant variants, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, produce enough offspring within a few seasons to dominate the population. And broad genetic diversity means that in a population of millions, the probability that no individual carries any useful variant for any given challenge approaches 0. The Colorado potato beetle is not adapting to insecticides because it is intelligent. It is not adapting because it is trying. It is adapting because the same mechanism that drives all evolution, differential survival, and reproduction is operating under conditions that maximize its speed. Large population, rapid generations, diverse genetics, strong and consistent selection pressure. It is evolution in real time, in your garden, completing cycles in weeks that ordinarily take millions of years. Now let us talk about what actually works, because the answer is not another insecticide. After 80 years of chemical warfare, agricultural science has converged on a different framework, not the elimination of the beetle, but its management. Not a war of extermination, but a strategy of containment. Crop rotation is the oldest and most reliable tool. The Colorado potato beetle overwinters precisely where potatoes grew. It descends into the soil in autumn, expecting to emerge in spring to food that will be in the same place. Move the potatoes. The beetle emerges into an empty field. It must search for food, expending energy, exposing itself to predation and weather, dying at a rate that meaningfully reduces the infestation pressure on wherever the potatoes actually are. Bacillus thuringiensis, a soil bacterium that produces proteins toxic specifically to beetle larvae, but harmless to birds, mammals, and most beneficial insects, provides biological control that the beetle has, so far, not developed resistance to. The bacterial protein attacks through a mechanism fundamentally different from synthetic insecticides, and the complexity of developing resistance to a biological system appears to be significantly greater. Resistance rotation, changing the class of insecticide every few seasons, never allowing a single compound to be the consistent selection pressure, slows but does not stop resistance development. Early season varieties that complete tuber formation before the peak of the second larval generation reduce crop damage even when population levels remain high. None of these approaches eliminates the beetle. The correct question, agricultural scientists now agree, is not how to destroy the Colorado potato beetle. It is how to keep its population below the threshold at which crop losses become economically significant. The beetle is here. It is integrated into the agricultural ecosystems of Europe, Russia, and North America, as firmly as the rat is integrated into the urban environment. Attempts at total chemical elimination destroyed pollinators, predatory insects, and soil ecosystems, the very organisms that provide natural regulation of beetle populations, while producing a beetle population that was resistant to everything and free of its natural competitors. This is the trap that the Soviet propaganda campaign and the American chemical industry and every government agricultural service fell into for 30 years. And this is the thing that makes the Colorado potato beetle genuinely important far beyond its role as an agricultural pest. It is a visible, documented, real-time demonstration of natural selection operating at a speed that human observation can track. Most evolution happens too slowly to observe. The development of the horse over 60 million years, the diversification of the finches of the Galapagos over tens of thousands of years. We reconstruct these processes from fossil records and genetic analysis, inferring what happened from the evidence left behind. The Colorado potato beetle does it in front of us. You spray a field, you come back the following season. The population that survived the spraying is measurably, genetically different from the population you sprayed. You have watched natural selection operate, not in a textbook, in your backyard, in a single growing season. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, 7 years after the Colorado potato beetle first encountered potato fields in Nebraska. Darwin spent decades accumulating evidence for natural selection from finches and fossils and barnacles and domesticated animals. He never saw it operate at the speed a potato farmer in Ukraine can observe it today. We have been given a living laboratory of evolution, and we have spent 80 years trying to poison it. The antibiotic resistance crisis, the growing inability of human medicine to treat bacterial infections because pathogenic bacteria have developed resistance to most or all available antibiotics, operates through exactly the same mechanism. Large populations, rapid generation times, consistent selection pressure from antibiotic use, genetic diversity, ensuring that resistant variants always exist in the population, differential survival and reproduction, amplifying those variants to dominance. The beetle in the potato field is a model for the bacterium in the hospital ward. The lesson is the same. The mathematics is the same. The outcome of any strategy based on chemical elimination without managing resistance development is the same. We have been running this experiment in our potato fields for 80 years. We have the results. We are slow to apply them to our hospitals. Here is what I want to hear from you. Have you ever fought the Colorado potato beetle on your own property? What worked? What failed completely? Because the comments under videos like this one consistently produce practical knowledge that no agronomic manual contains. The specific conditions, the specific approaches, the specific failures that only come from actually doing this in a real garden rather than a controlled experiment. Drop it in the comments. I read every one. The Colorado potato beetle is an invasive species. It did not evolve in the ecosystems of Europe or Russia or Western Siberia. It arrived there through human activity, through the global movement of potatoes that we initiated, through the trade networks and transportation infrastructure that we built. It occupies a niche that was empty precisely because no predator in those ecosystems had ever encountered it before. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the beetle's story forces into view. We brought it. Potatoes are a South American plant. We took them from the Andes and planted them across the world. The beetle followed the potato because the beetle follows food, and we were the ones carrying the food. If we had not spread potatoes to Europe, the beetle would still be a quiet mountain insect in the Sierra Madre, keeping to its wild nightshades, presented no problem to anyone. We created the conditions for the invasion by creating the invasion pathway. The correct relationship with the Colorado potato beetle is not war. It is not extermination. It is the relationship between a species and the unintended consequences of its own actions. A relationship that requires understanding and humility and the willingness to ask not, how do we win, but what did we do and what can we do differently? The beetle weighs less than half a gram. It will outlast every insecticide we throw at it. It will expand its range as the climate warms and the northern summers lengthen. It will be eating potatoes in Novosibirsk and beyond, following the warming isotherm that marks the boundary of its survival range, following it the way it has always followed food, patiently, persistently, without strategy or intention, but with the full force of 320 million years of evolutionary refinement behind every egg it lays. We called it a spy. We called it a saboteur. We spent 80 years trying to destroy it. It simply kept eating. That is not stupidity. That is not aggression. That is mastery of a kind that no intelligence can replicate. The mastery of a body perfectly suited to its world, running its ancient program without modification, in a world that has changed enormously around it. And perhaps that is the real lesson here. You cannot win a war against evolution. You can only negotiate a livable peace. The beetle does not know it won. It never knew there was a war. It just kept eating. And it will keep eating long after the last jar of insecticide has been formulated and the last propaganda leaflet has crumbled to dust, because the potato will still be there, and the beetle will find it, the way it has always found it, the way it always will.